traveling like a crazy person.
I am. I'm looking forward to being back. This is, I was just in Denver last week, teaching a class last week. Just beautiful weather. It was absolutely gorgeous, and it was funny. 4 or 5 days into it, I asked Erica. I was like, "So, what do you think about Denver?" And she's like, "I could actually move here." She goes, "It's in my top three list of cities now." He said there's San Diego, New York, and Denver are basically the three places left that she wants to live in the U.S. So
Those are really different places. Those are not.
totally. Yeah, yeah. So I think San Diego and Denver are both beautiful for their weather for different reasons. And New York is awesome as a cultural restaurant, shopping, million things to do 24/7. You don't go there for the weather, but you go there, to be in the downtown type stuff. So, yeah.
But you're still set on San Diego?
I thought she might change her mind with Denver. I thought she might do it because it's kind of cheaper. It's more car friendly than San Diego is, but she still loves San Diego as her number one.
What do you mean more car friendly?
There's less traffic. It's easier to
less
get
traffic.
around. The parking is, brace yourself, downtown parking. You bring a car into downtown and you $1 and you can get any parking meter that you want for an hour. I'm like, what? We just drove up to restaurants. There was no planning. We could park in front. I'm like, how is this even possible? Do people know about this? That was
That's
one of our
great to
days.
have in Chicago.
Yeah, very different. Chicago, $35,
For 1 minute.
anywhere. Yeah, yeah. So have you seen the valet on demand stuff in Chicago called Lux?
No.
So there's an app with your phone, and when you pull up to as you're going to a building, you say, "Here's where I'm going to be in front of." You pull in front of the building, a valet runs up out of nowhere, takes the keys, and parks your car. You don't know where they're going to park it, and then at the end, whenever you're going to go have it picked up, they will take it wherever you are. So like if you go shopping somewhere, they'll bring it over somewhere else. And it's price competitive with all the valet type stuff. So it's like, $20 for a day for valet parking or per, parking thing. But it's on demand anywhere, and they bring it to you anywhere. Yeah.
Chicago seems like a weird city to beta that in.
Sounds like a
All
good
right.
city to steal a car in.
Right?
Yeah. You go running up in a Lux jacket. Hi, I'm here for your car.
Yeah.
That wouldn't fly in Miami, that's for damn sure. Oh my gosh.
You guys already have that service in Miami. It's just that, you don't get the car back.
That's right. That's right. Hey, bro, I'm here for the car, man.
Yeah.
Oh boy. So you've tried the service then.
Exactly.
It works?
Oh,
You
what was
tried,
that?
tried the service?
I haven't, but it just came into my building even. So they'll even just do it right in front of our building. I'm like, well, we have a parking garage, so I'm not so sure that that's useful. But yeah, I'm totally in for that the next time I go do a restaurant somewhere.
Do you Uber still?
I love Uber.
You do Uber. In the city you Uber, even though you have a car.
Yes, I do. Oh, hell yes. Yeah, because often you don't know what parking's going to be like or how long you're going to be there or if you're going to be hammered when you go to get out. Yeah. Uber is heaven for that.
I know.
Uber's weird in New York.
Why
It's,
not?
well, when we were in Austin, it was great. Like, you called Uber, someone showed up in, like, a really nice car and drove you wherever you wanted. In New York, you get, like, these weird characters who, like, as soon as they accept your fare, will say that they picked you up, and then the car won't move on the map for, like, 10 minutes. And you're like, wait a minute. And then you go to cancel it, and you get charged a cancellation fee.
$5?
Like,
Oh.
yeah. So it's weird. It's weird in New York. In New York City, the cabs have their own app, just like Uber, where you can call like a city cab, like the hacks of that one of them show up wherever you are. So there's actually like some competition there. But like a bunch of times that I've tried to use Uber or even Lyft around here, it's been like just real shady people who like go the wrong way for a while, but they said they picked you up and they do all this other stuff, and you're like, come on, man.
I wonder if it's not taxi drivers that are purposely trying to break the system. Who just keep the app open and they're like, watch this.
They got these guys.
Yeah.
Down with Uber.
I mean, because honestly, cab drivers are probably the only people in the city with licenses.
And insurance, yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be them.
That is true. That is true. We lost Tara. She's gone into tunnel vision over there. She's just,
I'm here.
Yeah.
He's
My
on a
computer
hike right
rebooted due to security updates, and luckily Chrome has the option to restore all the tabs, and it turns out I had 31 open, and I needed, I don't know, 29 of them.
oh, wow.
I was going through them.
Ouch.
I'm the worst with that. I have so many open, not even tabs. I have so many open windows on
Oh.
my desktop, and they're always over Slack too, so all I can hear is all this pinging.
Oh.
No idea where the noise is coming from. And then you're probably one of those people who just closes the laptop and takes it home, and then you open it again, and you kick right off where you were going.
Exactly. Is that bad?
Yes. You and Erica. Erica does the exact same thing. They're all going to be here, right?
You properly close everything down and shut your laptop off?
Oh, hell yeah. Because
Yep.
I think it's just old computer geek. I don't trust anything's going to work when I close the lid.
Ah, that's probably a good, healthy habit to adopt.
Yeah, paranoia. Tinfoil hat. I put that on, too.
All right. It's 11:15. People are being dressed.
12:15.
9:15.
Well, we can't agree on anything.
11:15 somewhere. All right, let's jump in there. We have a question from Marcy. She says, any experience thoughts on backup software? Do you know will doing a local backup invalidate the restore chain up to time of last full?
Yes, unless you do copy only.
And so copy only, what kinds of backups does that affect? Like if you take a full backup with copy only, what does it do?
It takes a full backup of the database without changing the LSN differential base. So you can take a copy of it. You can restore. They're really good for restoring to refreshing dev databases or doing other stuff like that.
It's particularly important for differentials. If you're the kind of shop that's taking differentials, if all you're doing is transaction log backups, it doesn't matter. Transaction log backups can hook up to any full. It just really matters when you're doing differentials.
Yep.
Often when people ask this, what kind of backup software are you using, they're trying to mix native backups in, like Backup Exec or Veritas. Just know when you're doing your backups, you want copy only. Often these third-party options don't have those config settings.
Or a lot of people, if they're doing something like log shipping, won't be able to use the jobs inside there. Oh, like they'll have their backup software still trying to do it. I'm like, no.
Yeah, oh, that's a good point too. Yeah.
That won't work.
Log shipping, don't use the Backup Exec or Veritas log backup jobs.
Do we prefer to,
I don't know that we would need to tell them that because within 5 seconds of doing it, you're going to figure out it's broken.
Unless you don't have alerting or anything.
Well, that's true. That's true.
hey, Brent, your email's popping up on the slides.
It's like on Twitter. Like, how does that happen?
Uh-oh.
Now you know, because now that the people know it, they're going to be tweeting like crazy and having it show up on Webcast.
I'm famous.
Do we prefer any certain kind of backups? Like on SQL Critical Care, like the intro or our sales calls, they say they're either using SQL native backups, they're not doing transaction logs, or they're using Veeam, third-party software. Is there one that's standard, better than the other?
All right, we should go around through alphabetical order. Angie, what's your favorite kind of backup?
Ola Hallengren.
Let's see here. So the other Brent Ozar in the black shirt.
I like Dell Lightspeed
And why do you like it?
because it has cool stuff other than backups. You can read transaction logs with it, which I love, and you can do object level restores, which I love.
Yeah,
That's
I
DBA friendly stuff.
I would have to say, as the other Brent Ozar, I agree with you there. Like the ability to pluck objects out of a restore, that's freaking phenomenal. And to be fair, IDERA SQL Safe and Redgate SQL Backup have those same capabilities as well. Richie, how about you? What's your favorite kind of backup?
A DBA that does them.
Yeah, right. Or Azure. That was your chance to say Azure. Azure SQL Database.
I said that last time. I said that last time. So.
Send snapshots.
Ooh, Tara, how about you?
I used Lightspeed back when it was Quest. We converted over to Redgate SQL Backup just because of the cost reasons. They were basically the same product, but Redgate's solution was just so much cheaper, and they threw in a SQL bundle for the whole DBA team at a job a few years ago. But native backups with compression, as long as your backups are compressed, that's what I'm happy about. And then having full backup, possibly differentials and transaction logs, for very frequent transaction log backups.
I like it.
All right. Let's move on to a question from Heather. She says, do you need to run DBCC check DB on a log ship secondary that is always in restoring state?
So you can't, right? I mean, because you're not able to run commands on it.
And can you take a snapshot on a database that's in restoring?
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
No.
Yeah.
You could bring it into standby and do that, but
you can bring it into standby mode, but every single time log shipping has to do the restore, which is generally every 15 minutes or more frequently, is your DBCC check DB command going to complete in that window, which it's not on larger databases. So you're screwed there.
well, log shipping won't pick back up until you take it out of standby, so it'll just accumulate logs. It'll just
Oh no, it'll keep right on going.
It keeps back on. You'd have to disable the jobs for it to stop.
Yeah, and especially if you're one of those guys who sets up log shipping to kill all user connections whenever it's time to do a restore.
not one of those guys.
Nice.
All right. Nick asks, is it possible to hook into failover events? My extended events are never on after it fails over. Doesn't happen often, but it's a pain to lose all my query police events.
Oh, wow. I bet you're using always-on availability groups. And you're worried about... so why wouldn't you just run it all the time? What if it's an extended event session, why wouldn't you run it on every server?
I bet he doesn't have them set to automatically start when SQL
When the
pops
server
up.
starts?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So if it's a failover cluster, you probably want it to start every time the SQL Server starts up. If it's an availability group and you're failing around the AG from node to node, I would have it run with server startup there too, just so that because people could start running queries on the secondary. Tell us more about, if you want, Nick, follow up with more about your questions and your scenario. That's curious. I'd like to hear more about that. I mean, it's kind of extended events. I don't know that I want to hear more about it, but I probably should.
All right. Question from Dennis. He says, how do you know when the resource governor is causing a wait type?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh, without hitting the resource governor DMVs, I don't know if you could. There's resource governor DMVs where you could look at the pool.
But what wait type specifically?
SOS scheduler yield. So if you're banging up against CPU, if you have a CPU limit, page IO latch now if you're dealing with the new storage weights. That is such a good question. I'm actually going to look in that in the transcripts because that's a great idea for a blog post. Because I wanted to hit it for SP Ask Brent. I would want to know during a 5-second sample that queries are being throttled by resource governor, and I don't know how to do that offhand. If anyone knows in the listeners who's watching in the chat, feel free to post in a question that answers that, because we would all love to see that. And then you'll save us from doing work. And we don't really want to do work today. We'd rather surf Reddit.
Yeah, I have to work today after this.
No.
Yeah, I haven't been able to work today, so I would like to do some work today. How about that?
I'm scheduled in meetings with all of you, and that's, I guess, it's actually work. So it's.
For you.
Yes, for me.
Let's see. Do we know of any issues or bugs with SQL 2014 SP1 CU6? We have our buddy Scott. He's about ready to deploy to production after lab testing.
That's very specific.
Yeah. There's one with Hackathon. Yeah, one with Hackathon. If you're using Hackathon, there's an issue with backups. And I don't know that the hotfix is available to the public yet. Right now they're saying if you have Hackathon and you like backups, because, they're kind of nice to have, then you want to stick with CU3, I believe it is. There's a regression that came in 4, 5, and 6. That's the only one that I've heard of, though.
Right.
I used SP1 CU6 at my last place. We rolled it out. We did dev and staging all lower environments, and we didn't have any problems. But it's going to mileage vary everywhere you go. So if you tested it in your environment.
I call BS on that because this came out April 19th. You've been working with us for a while.
No. Oh, maybe that's maybe it was.
Are you holding down two jobs? Are you working somewhere else on the side?
Yeah. Puppy databases. I think I missed the SP1 part. We were just running CU6. I think RTM CU6.
There you go.
Never mind.
Disregard.
I was never here.
Disregard.
All right. Bill says, I'm a developer and have restored a backup to my local machine. I need to remove most of the data so it can be easily copied up to Azure for testing. Most of the data is in 3 tables. These 3 tables have between 500 million and 800 million records I need to delete. What is the fastest way to delete this amount of data?
Don't do it.
A bunch of foreign keys in the mix, so I don't think I can just copy the data to keep, truncate, and move it back.
You don't have to do any of that. You don't have to do a lick of work. You can script your database as statistics only, and you can put that anywhere. You can actually just run that as a script, and it'll create all your data, all your tables as statistics. Or it'll create all your tables, and it'll create the associated statistics, and then you will have then every query you run, SQL will act like it's hitting those tables because the statistics will feed the optimizer certain information. I think there's a blog post out there somewhere about it that I'll dig up.
Right, but if in this case, so if you're moving it up to Azure for testing, you're probably doing some app testing. How would that work with that, Brent, too?
It's going to fail anyway. It's Azure. I mean,
Oh.
I kid. So what you do is, and to elaborate on Eric's, just because this is not everybody's going to get this, you have to go into Tools Options in SSMS. Scripting the statistics is not on by default. So go into Tools Options, and there's a script set of options. So whenever you go to script out a database, you need to include statistics and things like partitions, partition functions. There's a bunch of things that aren't included by default. Then after you change those options, you can right-click on the database and go script, and there's a little wizard for it. So Richie raises a great question. What if there's some parts of some tables that you want to keep? You can script out those tables. You can script them as inserts with the select or the data inside there. Or if you're a developer, dude, you know how to insert data out. You go through and select the data out. You go insert it in somewhere else. So create the schema up in Azure first, because odds are that's going to fail. You're going to use some kind of objects that aren't supported in Azure SQL DB. You'll go figure out what those are, and then after you fix those, then you go insert the data up there. Just the parts you need.
And if you have queries that can determine which parts you need, you could just BCP the data out using those queries, using a view or a query, and then BCP that data into Azure.
Yeah, it's going to be
or
fast.
SSIS, import, export wizard, whatever.
Yeah, and that's what I would normally do is, hey, if I need to copy from one place to another, it'll just be a query or something, dump into a clean schema, and then away we go.
All right, Nick, our extended events friend.
Oh.
He said it's actually not an always-on availability group. It's a Windows cluster. He wasn't aware of setting and automatically start extended events on SQL Server. He's looking at any query that runs longer than 5 seconds, doesn't have a DBA, so he uses the extended events to hit anyone with a stick when they write a bad query. Or if this is crapping out. That's funny.
5 seconds seems a little bit low to me, unless there's there's something really cool about your environment where you have like an SLA of under 10 seconds, but any query over 5 seconds seems a little punch happy to me.
I used to support a system that had an SLA of 300 milliseconds. It was it was a big deal. So 5 seconds would have been someone would have been at my door.
And so to respect for that, she stood there with a kill command ready to 5. So we should also say too, so now you learned something, you have the session for setting for extended events to turn it on. While we're talking extended events, well, we actually like extended events. Be aware that the more stuff you capture, you can cause a performance problem. So if you get things like the query plan, even sometimes if you get the full text of the query, you can cause incredible slowdowns. So just make sure that you're gathering as little data as possible in order to get your stick on.
We did our query performance monitoring outside of SQL Server, and instead the application logged all its information, and we used Splunk to churn through the data, and it would send alerts if your performance was poor. So we didn't have to add any overhead to SQL Server.
Did you just have like your own inside the app? You would start logging whenever you called SQL Server log.
I don't know how the developers did it, but it was all developer magic to me. And then we had Splunk.
Smart people like Richie. I would say, too, if you're interested in that and you're a developer, check out the MVC Mini Profiler. So the MVC Mini Profiler, you don't have to be using the MVC design pattern, but the MVC Mini Profiler will log whenever you write queries. It'll log what queries they are. You can log it to, I want to say, not just SQL Server, but Redis and other caching type layers. So you can then analyze which queries are taking the longest in your application. It was totally open source, totally free. It's by the guys behind Stack Overflow, and it's what they use in order to monitor their query performance.
The question from Justin. He's wondering if we have ever seen this error in TempDB. Ever seen a query case cause this error in TempDB? The error is property size not available.
I have one running SSMS 2016 against an older SQL Server instance, older being like 2014 or things like that, and it has something to do with it expects in-memory objects in there. So make sure you're on the latest SSMS 2016 or release candidate or whatever they're calling it, or just try with SSMS 2014.
Ooh, let's go back to Nick. He says, is there a way to know if my extended events are taking too many resources? I don't log too much, but Brent mentioned the query text, which I do log.
There's a bunch of wait types. If you go to if you go to brentozar.com/askbrent, Ask Brent will give you your wait types on a SQL Server, and if your extended events wait types show up as big on the list, it can be an issue. Doesn't mean that it is, but you may be just tracing a bunch of stuff. That doesn't mean it's a bottleneck. What I would say is, too, when you set up your, and we talk more about the wait types in Ask Brent's documentation, when you set up your extended events session, log it asynchronously off somewhere else to a file and allow multiple event loss. There are settings to say, don't lose an event no matter what it is. You don't really need that. Allow multiple event loss in case the SQL Server's under pressure. That way you can kind of make the increase more likelihood that you're not going to slow the server down.
Let's go back to backups. Jonathan says, in my quest to make our backups faster, I found that specifying the buffer count and max transfer size values have increased speed immensely, but stripping the backup to multiple files has had no effect. My server is not under significant CPU or disk pressure at this time. Is network bandwidth my limiting factor?
You can test it by backing up to the null device to see what your throughput should be without any external factors such as the network. So backup, do the backup command, but do it to the null device instead, and that'll tell you what your system can support. And then you compare that to what your backup time is if it's going to, say, a NAS device, and you know that you know what the network is doing at that point. But buffer count and max transfer size can make significant improvements in your backup times. There are specific values you can pass it if your backups are to a NAS or to a SAN or local drives. I don't have those numbers memorized, but I think there's some blog articles out there that can tell you what the optimal values are for those two for wherever you're backing up, wherever you're sending your backups to.
And another limiting factor might be the disk you're backing up to. If you're only backing up to one disk, you could just be saturating that disk with the backup, so it might be a bottleneck there. Another thing to be careful of is if you're altering buffer count and max transfer size, and you're also using compression. Compression has a excuse me.
New York City.
Right. Crime-free. When you use compression, it is 3 times the memory penalty. So if you're altering buffer count and max transfer size, you want to watch your memory usage during backups, because there's 3 different streams. There's the read, compress, and write up stream. So there's 3 times the memory overhead as a regular backup. So just be careful with that. Don't set your values up too high. You could crash your server.
All right. Let's move on to a question from Sheldon. Do you know of any issues with upgrading to the latest versions of SQL database projects in Visual Studio that might impact releases?
Richie, any word on that? I don't think any of us use it.
I'm trying to Brady Bunch point at Richie, but it's not working.
What was the question again?
Where am I? Who do I look for?
I'm looking for the siren again. I got distracted.
Thought they were
Richie's
coming
doing
from
Sudoku.
Miami.
He just joins this to sit there and look pretty. Question is from Sheldon. They ask, do you know of any issues with upgrading to the latest versions of SQL database projects in Visual Studio that might impact releases?
Yeah, I know nothing. Especially as of the last couple Visual Studio versions, they've done a pretty good job about not breaking anything, even in the solution. Because before we used to have different solutions, but we could link to the same files underneath because of the different solution. The different Visual Studio versions had different stuff inside of them. But now, especially, I think starting in Visual Studio 13 and especially now in 15, everyone, on those lower versions can use it. So I would test it out, have a couple upgrade it, have a couple people look into it. But yeah, you shouldn't have any problems with it at all. Thank you for using it, because not enough people use database projects. I think it's a neat little tool there.
We used it at my last job extensively. It has been 5 months, so obviously, as far as latest versions go, CUs and service packs, we wouldn't be on the latest versions, from when I left at least. But we didn't have any issues with the various versions as long as you were running the right Visual Studio version or lower for the SQL Server version. You were okay. If you were trying to use a higher version of Visual Studio than SQL Server, when I say higher version, I mean like let's say SQL 2014. I forget what the versions was, but like Visual Studio 2013 you would use for SQL Server 2014. VS 2012 you would use for SQL 2012, but you could also use VS 2010 limited.
Yeah, don't 2010. Let's not go back there anymore.
We had to have it installed as well as Visual Studio 2008 because we had some SQL Server 2008 R2 things that we still were supporting. So we had multiple versions of Visual Studio on our desktops.
I'm glad I'm out of that game and not having 4 versions of Visual Studio anymore.
Yeah.
All right, another error somebody's seeing.
Yay.
It says there is insufficient memory available in the buffer pool during very busy times. It's 296 gigabytes of RAM on the box. Is this because SQL tries to allocate a minimum amount of RAM per query?
What you want to do is run SP Blitz. So SP Blitz will tell you the number of times you've had forced memory grants. Forced memory grants are when SQL Server says, look, I know you want a gig of RAM to run the... Oh my God, it's $3.95 and 14 kilobytes of RAM. So it will, and SQL Server tracks this in the DMVs. You can see the number of times it's happened since startup. It doesn't tell you when they've happened. It just tells you that they've happened. So run SP Blitz, and it'll tell you all kinds of things about forced memory grants. It's just a nice thing to run in terms of a health check, too. It'll tell you things if you have suspiciously high free memory, which can indicate that queries are getting a large memory grant and then releasing it. Lots of neat memory troubleshooting things that we've added across the last 5 or 10 releases of that.
Some people are just copying and pasting their error messages now. You can't do that.
Jessica has to read this stuff, man.
Not doing that. That's a question.
Have you ever seen a rash this bad?
Thank God they couldn't insert pictures.
Oh my gosh. David has an actual question. He says, do you know a way to apply a new app release with 0 downtime?
Yeah, just make sure your code is backwards compatible. If you're going to be adding columns, that your application is not using select star. You're altering store procedures. If you're adding new store procedures, those get added before you change your code. Yeah, you could definitely do it with 0 downtime. We did it all the time. We had releases every 2 weeks for the e-commerce website, and that was with 0 downtime. They used farms of virtual servers for the web tier and all that stuff, and then they just made sure all the store procedure code and all the schema changes, it was always backwards compatible. So no matter what version of the application that they ended up using after the deployment was done, it still worked with whatever. We didn't have to roll back the database changes.
Yep.
Another thing you can do is only add new features. Don't fix anything old.
Yeah.
And only.
The way the trendy term for developers is called additive changes, that you're only adding things, you're never taking things away. If you want to see how Stack Overflow does it, Nick Craver, one of their system or site reliability engineer, wrote a blog post called Stack Overflow, How We Do Deployment, 2016 edition, and he goes into insane details about how they do deployments with near zero downtime. Another site, if you're interested in this kind of thing, is highscalability.com. High Scalability profiles a lot of how websites and how they do database and IIS and Linux type deployments. There's a lot of spam in there. There's a lot of noise, but they've got some good signal from time to time, like how Etsy does deployments.
Yeah, it's definitely a practice. You're not going to just like jump into it and say, oh, all of a sudden I'm doing it. It takes a lot of work to change the way you do development in order to get zero downtime. It's definitely an effort where all levels need to be bought into it.
All right, our friend Nick is back. He says, any great resources on understanding column store indexes? Trying to wrap my head around them, but I can't figure out when to use them over row store indexes and how to set them up.
Nico Neubauer, I believe is how you pronounce that last name. I'll get a link to it. But he's written like a 80 bazillion part series on column store indexes, which answered more questions than you may even possibly have. He started like when they first dropped, and he's sort of cataloged things through until now. So there's a lot of good information in there.
His website is NicoPort, NicoPort.com. He's from Portugal. Nico's his first name, so that's where that URL comes from, and 80-some parts in there in that blog post series. Word for is especially perfect for data warehouses where you have a fact table that's really wide, so it's got lots of columns in it. It's really deep. It's got lots of rows in it. You can never predict what users are going to filter on or what they're going to sort by. And the table is highly compressible because it has the same data in it over and over again, like sale dates that compress really well, quantities, those just compress really well as well. So it's not unusual to see like an 80, 90, 95% compression rate with column store tables, but it is very specifically for data warehouses. It is not for OLTP.
It does a lot of really great things for like aggregate queries too.
Yeah.
So it's really whiz bang on that.
All right. Let's talk about HA. Monica had asked, what are the best options for SSRS HA? We are most likely moving to an HADR solution using a failover cluster with log shipping, and right now we run SSRS on our main production server.
Here's Doug.
And I sat in his past session, so I know this answer. So what you do for SSRS is you run it in a bunch of virtual machines. You run it in a whole bunch of virtual machines that are behind a load balancer, and if any one of them trips and falls over, you just don't care, as long as there's others that are available to, that are all pointed at the same report server DD. So if any of them, if you want to patch one, you can, totally not a problem. SSRS has relatively lightweight resource requirements, so you don't need physical boxes for it in most cases. You can just get by with relatively small VMs, but a lot of them.
All right. Look, Michael keeps copying and pasting that error. Not
Jessica's not reading it, sorry.
oh, errors.
Connectivity issues. So Michael asked a connectivity issue thing. We'll be honest, that's way faster. There's a slide on here that says for multi-paragraph questions, go ahead and ask those at dba.stackexchange.com. We got that up on the screen right now. Go ahead and put in dba.stackexchange.com in your browser. Whenever you've got multiple paragraphs that are involved in your question or your answer or error message, it's a wonderful site. Really love it a lot because other people answer it than us. That's why I'm one of the biggest fans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, just generally looking at that, I would just say make sure that SQL Browser is turned on.
SQL Browser, and then see if you can telnet to the port. on the client machine, do a telnet session, and telnet to the SQL Server with the port. And if it returns with the blank screen, it means your connectivity is fine. If you get an error, you've got something blocking the access. Network firewalls, something.
Something is amok.
All right, let's do one more. Marcy asks, I know I can try this on a pre-production server. Just wondering if you do or do not recommend setting trace flags 1204 and 1222 to get additional deadlock information.
Yes, but if you are on a newer version of SQL, you can get really great information from the extended events session. And there are queries out there to do that if you feel like goggling.
Yeah, really good.
I've turned on. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
If you come across that extended event, if you Google for like extended events deadlock session, there's one blog post that's notoriously great for this. Read the comments of the blog post, and I can't remember the author's name, but if the web page is black, keep reading through all the comments, and there's lots of improvements to the query inside the comments.
Cool. Well, it's 11:45 here in Chicago, so
12:45 New York time.
Time to start drinking! Woohoo!
No
water.
breakfast time.
All right, bye everybody. See y'all next week.
Bye.